So task 3 in our extending our JavaScript knowledge will introduce us to map, reduce, but we'll also map, reduce and filter. So we'll start off by talking about map, reduce and filter to see what they do, and then we'll do some examples. So task 3 will be about map and reduce, and then further task will then introduce map, reduce and filter. So the map, reduce and filter functions belong to an iterable or to an array. So if we have an array and we use a map function on it, it will return an array with the same number of transformed items. So if we start with 5 items, we will get 5 back. We could make them the same, but we could also transform them. For example, we could add 10% to them. Filter will return an array with an equal number or fewer items of the same type. So for example, we could filter on an array and find all the quotes which are greater than 1000. That might be less than the number that we started with, or it could be them all. Reduce returns an output of any type we want with as few or as many elements as we want. So for example, we could have an array of quote values, and what we want to do is reduce those so that we get the total. Or we could have an array full of claims made, and we want to get the sum of the claims. So 3 functions related to arrays: map, reduce and filter. So we'll take a look first of all at the map function. So let's say we have an array of customer details and we wish to get an array that has only the customer names. So we'll end up with the same number of items, but we only want the customer names. So first of all, we'll look at how we would do this using a for each function, which we can do. Then we will use a map function, which will iterate the array of customer objects. And then we can choose just the customer name to put into the array, rather than all the other details. Then we look at using a map function with an arrow function, which will iterate the array of customer objects. And again, we can choose the customer name only. So 2 different ways to do the same thing. And then we will use a map function and the arrow function, which will iterate the array of customer objects. And then we can transform one of the elements. So for example, we could take the age and add 1 onto it. So the map function will give me the same number of items. So if we look at this example, which we'll code in 1 second, then we have a customer array, and the array is full of JSON objects. Each JSON object represents a customer whose name we have, whose age, has accidents. So have they had any accidents before? And is sports car true? So in other words, is the quote going for a sports car or not a sports car? So in this case, we have 3 items. Then we set up a variable, which is called customer names 1, and it's an empty array. We then use the for each on the customers. And the customers, as we know, is 3 items. So for each one, we want to push just the customer name to the customer names 1 empty array. So we iterate using the for each. Each customer is iterated, and we just simply take the customer name. So let's see now if we can code that. So continuing as before, in our JavaScript folder, we will right click and go to New File, and we'll call it map.js. And we'll set up our array of objects called customers. So 3 customers. We then want to set up our empty array called customer names 1, And then we will use the for each iteration to iterate over the customer's object. And then what we will do is we will take each customer. So this says customer, but that could be anything. It's the customers is the array. And we say for each something. And then we have to use that something down here as well. So the easy thing to do is if we call that a customer, then this is customer.name. If you used a, that will be a.name. And what we're trying to do is find just the name and push it to the customer names one empty array. And what we would like to do now is we would like to then see if that actually works. So we will use a console.log to go, the customer names are, and this is in the backticks. Then we use customer names one, which is the array. So if I right click on map.js and go to open in integrated terminal, the terminal window will appear at the bottom and all my files will be listed here. If I do ls, or if you're on a Windows you can do dir, and I can see map.js. So I will run node map.js and press enter, and it shows me the customer names are Jerry, David and Claire. So it has just picked out Jerry, David and Claire, and that is using the for each. But we can also use a map function. So when we use the map function, we're saying we want to take the customers array and we want to map each customer, and we want to return just the customer name. So this is the same as the for each, but a slightly different way to do the same thing. So we will code that example. So going back, I can just include this at the bottom. So here is our map. So the map will take in a function, and the function accepts a customer, and the function returns customer.name. So go back down to our terminal at the bottom and just use my up arrow and run node again using map.js, and we see that this gives me exactly the same as previous using the for each. Now another way to do the same thing is to use the map, but with this thing called an arrow function. In the previous example, we had the word function, so it takes in a function. Well, this is exactly the same thing, but it's an anonymous function. So again, it says the customer will go to customer. So we are saying customer names 3 is equal to customers, which is our array, dot map, and take the customer and put it to another customer. Or it could be customer multiplied by 10, divided by 2, whatever. And then console.log, the names are, let's code up. And then once again, if we run node map.js, this time we didn't want the name, and what we got was everything. So we got the name, the age, has accidents, and is sports car for each. Now the last one then is we're now going to transform the data. So in this case, it's very similar to the last one, but what we're saying is that we want to map the customer to return name, colon, customer name, comma, age, colon, customer age, plus 1. So we're adding 1 to the age. And has accidents, customer dot has accidents, and is sports car, customer dot is sports car. In other words, the same as these variable or fields up here. The only difference is that this time the customer is going to be transformed because the customer age is going to have a 1 added to it. And then we console.log the customer names for a different array basically here from before. So let us go back to our Visual Studio Code and we will code that one. Let's add the last print line. So we want to do console.log the customer's new age is and print out the new array. So use our up arrow. So we can see that the age was 30, it's now 31. The age was 40, it's now 41. The age was 50, the new age is 51. So now we'll look at the reduce function of the array. Let's say that we have an array of customer details as we did in the last example, including an age for each, and we wish to get the total value of the ages. We will use a reduce function which will iterate the array of customer objects and accumulate the ages starting with an initial value of 0. After running the callback for each element of the array, the reduce function will return the final value of our accumulator, which in our case is 120. We will then use a reduce function with the arrow function to iterate the objects, and then we will use the reduce function to find the oldest customer. So once again we will use exactly the same customer array, but we will use the dot reduce function, and it takes in a function, and this function takes in two values, accumulator, which will start off at 0, and then customer, and it will return the accumulator plus the customer age. So first time around it will be 0 plus 30. So our accumulator really then becomes 30. Then it goes round again and it goes 30 plus 40. So our accumulator becomes 70. And then it goes round again and becomes 70 plus 50, which is 120. And then it'll stop because there are no more items in our customers. We don't need to worry about how many there are. Reduce will do all that for us. And the 0 in the brackets says that we want to start with an initial value of 0. Sometimes we may not want to do that. And then we want to log out the total of all ages, the value, in other words, the 120. So opening up Visual Studio Code again, we will once again right click on our JavaScript folder, go to new file, and we will call it reduce.js. Once again, we will define our customers in an array object. So customers in an array, and we have 3 objects. Now we want to use the reduce function as we saw. So we want to reduce the customers array, and we want to accumulate the values, and we want to print them out. Go into my integrated terminal if I have it already opened as we had before, or we can right click and go to open an integrated terminal. And this time we'll need to type in node and then the name of this file, which is reduce.js. And we can see that the total of the claims is 120. How clever is that? We could certainly have done that a different way using our own for each iteration, but this is a very quick way to do the same thing. But we can tidy it up even more, as we said, because what we can do is we can now reduce using the arrow function. And what we're saying in this case then is that we want to reduce, again, accumulator and customer. But what we want to turn it into is accumulator plus customer age. And again, starting at 0. So we will code that example. So reduce accumulator and customer is just exactly the same as before, but we're using the arrow function as opposed to using a function. But remember, it still takes in 2 values. And then what we're saying is the output's going to be accumulator plus customer.age, and we start at 0. In the integrated terminal, let's run reduce again, and we can see that we get the 120. Now we can do it a different way again. So in this case, what we want to try to do is to find the oldest. So we're going to do a reduce, and we're going to use just function, oldest and customer. Again, the names really don't matter that much. We can change them if we want, but it just makes it easier for me to understand that this will be the oldest and this will be to do with the customer. So what we're doing now is we're going to return oldest.age or 0. For the first time around it'll be 0. And we're going to say if that's greater than the customer age, then that's the oldest. Otherwise, we keep the customer. So let's code that and see what happens. This is our ternary expression here. And we're just trying to see if the age that we have at the minute is greater than the age that has come in. So if we run the code, we can see that it has told us that the oldest customer age is, and because I printed out the whole of the customer, the oldest customer, here, but then what happens is it prints out the name, the age, and the rest of the details. The third and final array function that we look at is the filter function. So let's say we have an array of customer details, including the age for each, as we have seen in the last 2 examples, and we wish to get only those customers over a specified age. So we will use a filter function which will iterate the array of customer objects and find the vehicles which are sports cars. We will use a filter function which will iterate the array of customer objects and find the vehicles which are not sports cars. But we could do this for age, or we could do it for has accidents. Whatever we want to filter our data. And filter generally will reduce the number of items. In this case, we use the same array as we used before with our customers. And then we are setting up a variable called sports cars, and we go customers, the array of 3 items, objects, dot filter. So dot filter is a function, but it takes in a function, and this function takes in a customer, and it returns customer dot is sports car equal to true. So it returns it if the sports car has been set to true. So in this case, it should return Jerry and David. So if we look over here, it returns Jerry and David, and it returns the whole object because that's what we've said. We're not saying we just want the name or anything like that. So we can code that example and see what happens. Go back into Visual Studio Code, and once again we will right click on the JavaScript folder, we'll go new file, and we call it filter.js, and we'll put in our array of objects as before. We will then use our filter on the array of objects, And we'll tell it just to return those which are true for the is sports car. And then we will print out the sports cars. So once again, if you have the console open, great, we can run it, or just right click on your filter.js and go to open in integrated terminal. And then we will type in the integrated terminal node, and then we will use the filter.js. And we can see that we've got David and Jerry because their sports car is true. And if we wanted, then we can change it and use the arrow function, and we will use it for the sports car is false. So we're doing the same thing as before. Go back into Visual Studio Code and set up a variable called non-sports cars. And then we do a filter, but the filter this time is on false for the is sports cars. And then we shall print that out. So once again, go down to our integrated terminal and run the same thing again, filter.js. And we can see that, yes, it has given us the one that we require. Exactly as we said here. So now we have an understanding of the three functions that we can use with the array, map, reduce and filter. Let's now apply them to a task. So create a vehicle insurance quote for one customer based on the following details. There is a base insurance amount of $20, an age factor of 1.2. So we multiply the age of the customer by this factor, an accident factor of 1.5. So we multiply our quote by 1.5 for those vehicles that have had an accident. A sports car factor of 2, so we multiply our quote by 2 if the vehicle is a sports car. We then define the details for a customer and vehicle in a customer object. The details are the customer age, has the vehicle been involved in an accident, true or false, is the car a sports car, true or false. Our formula for working out the insurance quote is the base rate, which is $20, multiplied by customer age, multiplied by the age factor, 1.2, multiplied by accident factor, which is 1.5, if they have been involved in an accident, multiplied by the sports car factor, which is 2, if it's a sports car. So an example, 20 times 30 multiplied by 1.2, multiplied by 1, so the accident factor, this car has not been in an accident because it's a 1, multiplied by 2, it's a sports car, and that gives us 1440. So here's an example of what we're going to do. We're going to set up a customer as before with an age of 30, has accidents as false, and is sports car as true. We can do different ones, and we should end up getting a value of 1440. So how are we going to code? What are we going to put into our code? Well, first we'll declare and initialize the variables, the base insurance rate of 20, an age factor variable of 1.2, an accident factor of 1.5, and a sports car factor of 2. Then we will define the details of a customer and vehicle, the customer age, has the vehicle been involved in an accident, is this car a sports car. We will then create an array of factors that will hold all of the values that we require for the insurance quote. So inside this array, we will use a ternary operator to set a factor of 1.2 if accidents is true, otherwise we'll change it to 1. We will use another ternary to set a factor of 2 if the sports car factor is true, otherwise it will still be a 1. And then we will reduce the details of the quote by multiplying all the factors together, starting with an initial factor of 1 or initial value of 1. So inside the array will be all the values we need, and then we tell the reducer that we want to reduce those and give us 1 value. And then we will output the final insurance quote to the console, and we will do that with 2 decimal places. So the code will be set up our variables. So base rate of 20, age factor 1.2, accident factor 1.5, and sports car factor of 2. We then define our customer, age 30, has accidents is false, and is sports car is true. And then we set up an array which will hold the base rate, which is 20, then the customer age multiplied by the age factor. Then, if there has been an accident, then we will just leave the value as 1.5. Otherwise, we'll change it to 1. If it's a sports car, then we just leave it as sports car factor, which is 2. Otherwise, we change it to a 1. So these are our 2 ternary. We then reduce using the accumulated value, which will start off as 1 this time, not 0 like we did in the previous examples, because we're going to multiply. And then we end up with a new value. So we take the accumulated value to start with, which is 1, and we multiply it by whatever the new value is. So the new value is all of those multiplied together. And then the next time, it'll go around and do the same for the next customer. But we only have 1 customer, so it's going to calculate our value. And in the last part, we will print it out to 2 decimal places. And in the screenshot up at the top, we will see that it should be 1440. Go back to Visual Studio Code, right click on the JavaScript folder, go to New File, and we'll call it mapreduce.js. And then we'll define our variables. Then we'll create our customer. And then we'll create our array, but the array will have a reducer at the end. So we'll reduce the values. And then finally, we would like to print out what insurance quote is. So we will do the insurance quote to 2 decimal places. So the insurance quote holds all of the values for the 1 customer and accumulates the values by multiplying them, starting off with the value of 1. Again, we right click on the MapReduce and open the integrated terminal if we have closed the terminal. If not, we simply do node, and then we do mapreduce.js. And that should give me 1440.